Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to the History of Star Wars. This is part 2, ranging from 1984 all the way to 1998. We're going to dive into the video right now, but before we do so, please hit that like button down below, subscribe to the channel for continued Star Wars content, and comment below and let me know what your favorite piece of Star Wars material is from this era. Also, let's try to hit 35 likes. I think we can do that on this video. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Caravan of Courage, an Ewok Adventure, 1984. Caravan of Courage, an Ewok Adventure was the second Star Wars made-for-television film released since the series' inception. The film followed a family of humans who have been shipwrecked on the Force moon of Endor. The parents are kidnapped by a creature known as the Goraks, forcing their children Mace and Sindel to mount a rescue attempt with the help of Wicket and the other Ewoks. The film debuted on November 25, 1984 on ABC. Caravan of Courage perpetuated the Ewoks' craze that began the year prior with the release of Return of the Jedi. Despite a less than enthusiastic critical reception, Caravan of Courage recorded the second highest TV ratings of any movie on ABC in 1984, and its success led to the further expansion of the Ewoks as a franchise in and of themselves in merchandising, children's books, television cartoons, and comics. The Ewoks Young Reader series continues, 1984 to 1987. The Ewoks Young Reader series continued in 1984, but this time continued the adventures of Wicket and his Ewok pals rather than adapt scenes from Return of the Jedi. The Ewoks Young Reader books that were released in 1984 were How the Ewoks Saved the Trees, an Old Ewok Legend, Baby Ewoks Picnic Surprise, The Adventures of Teebo, a Tale of Magic and Suspense, The Ewoks Hang Gliding Adventure, and Wicket Finds a Way, an Ewok Adventure. More Ewoks Young Reader books were released in 1986, titled Fuzzy as an Ewok, which was a touch and smell book, and The Ewok Who Was Afraid, an Ewok Adventure. With the release of the two Ewoks TV movies, Caravan of Courage and The Battle for Endor, and the Ewoks television cartoon in between 1984 and 1986, the Ewoks Young Reader series also adapted the films as well as many of the episodes of the series into books consumable for young children. These Ewok adaptations included the Ewok Adventure, children's book on tape adaptation of Caravan of Courage, and Ewoks and the Lost Children, children's adaptation of Caravan of Courage in 1985. The Shadow Stone, an Ewok Adventure adaptation, was an adaptation of Ewoks Episode Number 9, Sunstar vs. Shadowstone. The Red Ghost, an Ewok Adventure, was an adaptation of Ewoks Episode Number 13, Asha. The Ring, the Witch, and the Crystal, an Ewok Adventure, was an adaptation of the Battle of Endor in 1986. In 1987, the series was reformatted and numbered as it began adapting episodes of the cartoon with the same name as the books. The books adapted in 1987 included The Haunted Village, To Save Deej, Sunstar Against Shadowstone, and Wicket's Wagon. Droids, 1985 to 1986. First airing September 7th, 1985, Droids was Star Wars' first animated series. The series centered around C-3PO and R2-D2 as they go on a variety of adventures prior to the events of Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. Droids and Ewoks pushed many standard Saturday morning cartoon boundaries with extremely high production costs for the time, and sci-fi fantasy stories that would look to push the limits of what ABC considered suitable programming for children. After one season, Droids was cancelled due to its high production costs. However, the series would officially wrap up in 1986 with a 1-hour special titled The Great Heap, which served as a prequel to the rest of the series. Droids children's book Adaptations, 1985 to 1987. The stories of the Droids cartoon were also given the children's book adaptation treatment from 1985 to 1987. These books were each based on an episode of the series with the same title. The first book was released in 1985, titled The Lost Prince, a Droid Adventure. 1986 saw the release of 3 more books: The White Witch, a Droid Adventure, The Pirates of Tarnuga, a Droid Adventure, and Escape from the Monster Ship, a Droid Adventure. In 1987, the Droids books also received a redesign as the series changed publishers from Random House to Dragon Picture Books. This time the series had 4 numbered releases: The White Witch, Escape into Terror, The Trigon Unleashed, and Race to the Finish. Ewoks, 1985 to 1986. Ewoks was the second ever Star Wars animated series, airing immediately after Droids on September 7, 1985, as part of the Ewoks and Droids Adventure Hour. It featured the adventures of the Ewoks of Bright Tree Village prior to the events of the Battle of Endor. Developed in conjunction with Droids, Lucas wanted Ewoks to similarly push the boundaries of Saturday morning cartoons with its storytelling and visuals, which led to steep production costs. However, unlike Droids, which was cancelled after 1 season due to its production costs, Ewoks was slightly cheaper to animate due to the more cartoony look to its animal-like creatures and characters compared to Droids' array of humans and humanoids. Ewoks was renewed for a second season, but was cancelled after season 2 due to low viewership. Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, 1985. Ewoks: The Battle for Endor was a made-for-television movie that served as the sequel to 1984's Caravan of Courage. This time, the film focused on Sindel, the same girl from Caravan of Courage who similarly goes on an adventure with Wicket and the other Ewok friends after her parents and brother Mace are killed by the Senyasin Marauders. Battle of Endor was slightly better received critically upon its release, as it featured more action, fantasy, and world building than its predecessor. According to George Lucas, there were plans to make a third Ewoks film, but the Battle of Endor stretched their smaller TV budget to its limit, and it didn't seem like a third film could be made due to the expenses. Ewoks, 1985 to 1988. Ewoks was a 14-issue comic book series published by Star Comics, an imprint of Marvel Comics. The series tied into the events of the cartoon and was targeted for the cartoon's similarly younger audience. Although the mainline series itself wrapped up in 1987, the series' official last issue was released in 1988 with an annual only printed in the UK, featuring a combination of reprinted and original stories. Star Wars Droids, 1986 to 1987. Star Wars Droids was an 8-issue long comic book series also published by Marvel Comics imprint Star Comics. Similarly to Ewoks, Star Wars Droids was a tie-in to the cartoon, with issues 1 through 5 taking place prior to the events of the show, and the final few issues adapting the events of A New Hope from the perspectives of C-3PO and R2-D2. Star Wars West Endgame Sourcebook Short Stories, 1987 to 1997. Beginning in 1987, West End Games began publishing a collection of Star Wars sourcebooks for the first ever Star Wars role-playing game. Many of these sourcebooks contained a variety of short stories expanding on old characters as well as introducing new characters. This began in the Star Wars Sourcebook, which was released in 1987 with the story Song for a Fallen Nomad. I've listed every short story here, and its release year, and the sourcebook it can be found, for those of you interested in learning more about each story itself. Star Wars 3D, 1987 to 1988. Star Wars 3D was a 3-issue comic book miniseries published by Blackthorn Comics. Despite the title, Star Wars 3D did actually tell an original story rather than just adapt A New Hope with a 3D gimmick. Each issue follows a combination of Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewbacca in one-shot stories that connect some of the events between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. Star Wars Droids, 1988. Star Wars Droids was a video game released for the Amstrad CPC Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum. The game revolves around C-3PO and R2-D2 escaping imprisonment from the Thrawn gang complex while other droids try to stop them. The Thrawn Trilogy, 1991 to 1993. The most famous and most influential Star Wars novels of all time, the Thrawn Trilogy by Timothy Zahn began in 1991 with Heir to the Empire and continued through 1992 and 1993 with the sequels Dark Force Rising and The Last Command. The Thrawn Trilogy was a smash success both critically and commercially, and it is often credited with keeping the franchise relevant and afloat as it pushed beyond the events of the films, telling a grand and extremely important story that continued the events of the original trilogy, rather than what had become the previous norm of Star Wars stories since the end of Return of the Jedi, which was to pad the original trilogy with small-scale, insignificant stories. Zahn's novels took the series' mainline characters, for the first time gave them a direction and characterization that felt faithfully similar to the films, while also being starkly new. Like Lucas before him, Zahn's trilogy built an entirely new world of Star Wars mythology, which further fleshed out the Galactic Civil War, deepened and enhanced the lore of the Force and the Jedi, and gave far more character to the universe's seedy underworld. In doing so, Zahn created new characters such as Grand Admiral Thrawn, Captain Gilad Pellaeon, Mara Jade, and Talon Karrde, new species such as the Chiss, the Nogri, and the Salamiri, and new worlds such as Honoghr, Murker, and the first ever use of the name Coruscant as the Imperial capital that added layers to the Star Wars mythology that has continued to influence the lore even to this day. And with Disney Plus's The Mandalorian seemingly hell-bent on adapting this story in some form, this trilogy's influence doesn't seem to be disappearing from the franchise anytime soon. Star Wars Dark Empire Trilogy, 1991 to 1997. The Dark Empire Trilogy was a series of 3 separate comic book miniseries from Dark Horse Comics, beginning with Dark Empire in 1991, continuing with Dark Empire 2 in 1995, and ending with Empire's End in 1997. Dark Empire and Dark Empire 2 were both written by Tom Veitch and penciled by Cam Kennedy. Empire's End was co-written by Veitch and Mike Beatler and penciled by Jim Bakey. Similarly to the Thrawn Trilogy, the Dark Empire Trilogy is credited with helping create a renewed excitement in both Star Wars comics and the franchise at large after nearly a decade of waning interest. Each book in the trilogy tells a bombastic, comic-heightened story about some of the final battles between the Rebels and the Empire, centering on the resurrection of Emperor Palpatine in clone bodies and Luke Skywalker dealing with and recovering from a brush with the dark side. Despite not receiving as glowing reviews as the Thrawn Trilogy, Dark Empire's mark on Star Wars' mythology has remained important to this day, as the idea of Palpatine's survival through clone bodies post-Return of the Jedi was a major plot point of Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. The Jedi Prince series, 1992 to 1993. The Jedi Prince series was a series of 6 junior novels written by Paul Davids and Hollis Davids. The first 3 books, The Glove of Darth Vader, The Lost City of the Jedi, and Jabba the Hutt's Revenge, were released in 1992, and the final 3 novels, Mission from Mount Yoda, Queen of the Empire, and Prophets of the Dark Side, were released in 1993. All 6 stories take place after Return of the Jedi and follow the main character of the series, a 12-year-old Force-sensitive boy named Ken, as well as the rest of the traditional Star Wars cast of characters as they take on the villainous self-proclaimed son of Palpatine, Trioculus, or Triclops, and the father of Jabba the Hutt, Jabba the Hutt. While the series did feature the first junior novel expansion of the Star Wars EU, it was widely disregarded by most of the authors and storytellers in the EU, and thus many elements such as the first depiction of the wedding of Han Solo and Princess Leia in this series have been retconned in other material. Super Star Wars series, 1992 to 1994. The Super Star Wars series, Super Star Wars, Super The Empire Strikes Back, and Super Return of the Jedi, was a set of 3 loose video game adaptations of the original trilogy developed by LucasArts and Sculptured Software for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The game consisted of a variety of platforming and piloting levels that recreated and expanded the scenes of their respective films. Star Wars X-Wing, 1993. Star Wars X-Wing was a video game published by LucasArts for PC. Featuring critically acclaimed flight simulation combat, X-Wing allowed players to assume the role of Kian Farlander, a young pilot in the Rebel Alliance, as they got the opportunity to pilot from the cockpit of an X-Wing, Y-Wing, and A-Wing in battles prior to the events of A New Hope. Limited edition copies of X-Wing contained a companion book titled The Farlander Papers, which featured a short story about Kian setting the scene for the events of the game. Tales of the Jedi, 1993 to 1998. Tales of the Jedi by Tom Veitch and Kevin J. Anderson, as well as a long list of pencilers, was a comic book series that featured 8 different story arcs published by Dark Horse Comics. The series featured 6 arcs set in the Old Republic era and took place around the time of the Great Sith War. The majority of tales followed Jedi Knights Ulic Qel-Droma and Nomi Sunrider, as well as a host of other characters, most notably among them the fallen Jedi Exar Kun. These 6 arcs were titled Ulic Qel-Droma and the Beast Wars of Onderon, The Saga of Nomi Sunrider, The Freedom Nod Uprising, Dark Lords of the Sith War, and Redemption. The series' final 2 arcs, The Golden Age of the Sith and The Fall of the Sith Empire, were set thousands of years prior to the stories of Ulic Qel-Droma and revolved around the Sith Lord Naga Sadow and his schemes to invade Republic space. Tales of the Jedi was Dark Horse's first ongoing Star Wars series, and the series was notable for being the first Star Wars material to broach the Old Republic. The Truce at Bakura, 1993. The Truce at Bakura by Kathy Tears was the first Star Wars adult novel published after the conclusion of the Thrawn Trilogy. The story follows our rebel heroes in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Endor as they attempt to form a truce between the Alliance and the Imperial forces located in an outpost on the planet Bakura at the edge of known space. Their ability to work together is the only thing that can stop the invasion of the reptilian Sea Rook who want to claim known space for themselves. Star Wars Rebel Assault, 1993. Star Wars Rebel Assault was an arcade-style video game developed and published by LucasArts for PC. The plot revolves around an unnamed pilot with the handle Rookie 1, who's a farms person on Tatooine recruited into the Rebel Alliance during the events of A New Hope. The game features many retellings of scenes from the film in a non-chronological order, which has left most of its narrative in a gray area as to whether it's truly a part of the canon of the Legends timeline. The Jedi Academy Trilogy, 1994. The Jedi Academy Trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson was a book trilogy taking place after the events of the Thrawn Trilogy, featuring the novels Jedi Search, Dark Apprentice, and Champions of the Force. The novels center around the spirit of Exar Kun attempting to possess the trainees of Luke's Jedi Academy, which ultimately causes the trainee Kip Duran to rampage across the galaxy in the Sun Crusher, a nearly indestructible superweapon no longer than the size of a starfighter, capable of unleashing destruction greater than the Death Star. The Jedi Academy Trilogy was notable for continuing the EU story further past the events of the Thrawn Trilogy, as well as for being the first appearance of Exar Kun, even if only in spirit form. Star Wars Adventure Journal Short Stories, 1994 to 1998. Star Wars Adventure Journal was a 15-issue publication by West End Games that featured a variety of short stories, interviews with Star Wars creators, and news about upcoming products. The Courtship of Princess Leia, 1994. The Courtship of Princess Leia by Dan Wolverton was a novel set 4 years after Return of the Jedi and 1 year prior to the original Thrawn Trilogy. The story revolves around Princess Leia, who in a desperate attempt to garner new, rich, and powerful allies for the Rebel Alliance, considers a proposal of marriage to Prince Isolde. Afraid she'll go through with the proposal, Han tricks Leia into absconding with him to Dathomir in an attempt to win her heart. The Courtship of Princess Leia retcons the Jedi Prince series' depiction of the wedding of Han and Leia, technically making it the correct version in the Legends timeline. It also features the first ever appearance of the planet Dathomir and the Dathomirian witches, later known as the Night Sisters. Star Wars Droids, 1994 to 1997. Droids was a comic series from Dark Horse Comics revolving around C-3PO and R2-D2. The series featured 3 arcs: the Kalarba Adventures, Rebellion, and Season of Revolt, as well as 3 one-shots: R2's Day Out, published in Galaxy Magazine #1, Droid Special, and the Protocol Offensive, as well as an Applejack's one-page comic strip, all of which took place prior to the events of A New Hope. Star Wars TIE Fighter, 1994. Star Wars TIE Fighter was the video game sequel to Star Wars X-Wing, developed by Totally Games and published by LucasArts. Like X-Wing, TIE Fighter was a Star Wars flight simulation game, but this time allows players to play as a TIE Fighter pilot, Merrick Stell, between the events of The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. TIE Fighter featured much improved graphics and gameplay, and has since become known as a classic of the flight simulation genre, as well as one of the greatest Star Wars video games of all time. Again, like X-Wing, limited edition copies of TIE Fighter featured a short booklet titled The Stell Chronicles, which gave backstory on the life and recruitment of Merrick Stell. The Crystal Star, 1994. The Crystal Star was a novel by Vonda N. McIntyre taking place in 14 ABY. The story follows 2 main plots. First, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, and R2-D2 as they attempt to track down Heir, a powerful Imperial officer who she believes has kidnapped her children. The second plot sees Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, who investigate a cult on the planet orbiting a slowly crystallizing star led by the mysterious Waru. Star Wars Galaxy Magazine Short Stories, 1995 to 1997. Star Wars Galaxy Magazine was a periodically published quarterly by Topps, which ran 13 issues. Beginning with issue number 2 in 1995, some Galaxy magazines featured short stories including The Battle of Cadenth, Lumia Dark Star of the Empire, Hunting the Hunters, Dark Vendetta, Wanderer of Worlds, Sandbound on Tatooine, The Emperor's Trophy, and Priority X. Star Wars Dark Forces, 1995. Star Wars Dark Forces was a first-person shooter video game developed and published by LucasArts and released on PC. The game introduced fan-favorite Legends character Kyle Katarn, a former Imperial stormtrooper and agent turned mercenary in the service of the Rebel Alliance. The events of the game take place just before and right after A New Hope, and its story was notable for featuring the first depiction of the Rebel theft of the Death Star plans. The Corellian Trilogy, 1995. The Corellian Trilogy was a novel trilogy written by Roger McBride Allen, which chronicles the Solo family's visit to Corellia, which unbeknownst to them, is on the brink of civil war. The trilogy is made up of the novels Ambush at Corellia, Assault at Salonia, and Showdown at Centerpoint. Jabba the Hutt, 1995 to 1996. Jabba the Hutt was a series of 4 one-shot comic books created by Dark Horse Comics, written by Jim Woodring, and penciled by Art Weatherall. The 4 one-shots featured were The Gar Sapoon Hit, The Hunger of Princess Nampi, The Dynasty Trap, and Betrayal. The stories took place 5 years prior to the events of A New Hope. The Callista Trilogy, 1995 to 1997. The Callista Trilogy was a series of novels centering around the common character of Callista Ming, an ex-Jedi Knight and love interest of Luke Skywalker. The 3 books that make up the trilogy are Children of the Jedi by Barbara Hambly, Dark Saber by Kevin J. Anderson, and Planet of Twilight, also by Barbara Hambly. Young Jedi Knights, 1995 to 1998. Young Jedi Knights was a series of young adult novels written by Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Moesta. The series is set in 23 and 24 ABY, and follows the adventures of the Jedi twins Jason and Jaina Solo. Young Jedi Knights was comprised of 14 novels: Heirs of the Force, Shadow Academy, The Lost Ones, Lightsabers, Darkest Night, Jedi Under Siege, Shards of Alderaan, Diversity Alliance, Delusions of Grandeur, Jedi Bounty, The Emperor's Plague, Return to Ord Mantell, Trouble on Cloud City, and Crisis on Crystal Reef. The series is notable for giving strong, independent characterizations to the Solo children, while also being the first ever Star Wars YA book series. Tales series, 1995 to 1999. The Tales series consisted of 5 anthology books featuring short stories from many of the most prolific authors writing in the Star Wars EU at the time, as well as many other new writers. Each anthology book's short stories revolved around the characters, locations, and themes of its title. The novels featured in the Tales series were Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, Tales from Jabba's Palace, Tales of the Bounty Hunters, Tales from the Empire, and Tales from the New Republic. Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron series, 1995 to 1998. Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron was an ongoing comic series published by Dark Horse Comics, running for 35 issues in total, plus a special from Applejack cereal and a promotional half issue. Written and penciled by various writers and artists, including Michael A. Stackpole, who would later write 5 of the X-Wing novels that would tie into the comics. The series contained 9 story arcs: The Rebel Opposition, The Phantom Affair, Battleground Tatooine, The Warrior Princess, Requiem for a Rogue, In the Empire's Service, Family Ties, Masquerade, and Mandatory Retirement. Junior Jedi Knights, 1995 to 1997. Written as a companion series to Young Jedi Knights, Junior Jedi Knights was a series of young reader novels written by Nancy Richardson and Rebecca Moesta, set in 22 ABY, a year before Young Jedi Knights. The series followed the adventures of Anakin Solo, Tahiri Vela, Jedi Master Ikrit, and Uldir Locket. Junior Jedi Knights was comprised of 6 novels in total: The Golden Globe, Lyric's World, Promises, Anakin's Quest, Vader's Fortress, and Kenobi's Blade. Thrawn Trilogy comic adaptations, 1995 to 1997. The Thrawn Trilogy received 3 6-issue comic book adaptations, beginning in 1995 with Heir to the Empire, and continuing in 1997 with Dark Force Rising and The Last Command. Each adaptation was written by Mike Barron and penciled by a variety of artists. Star Wars Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire, 1995. Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire was the video game sequel to Rebel Assault, developed and published by LucasArts and released for PC. Rebel Assault 2 received a complete graphical and gameplay overhaul from its predecessor, this time incorporating flight sim gameplay, more in the vein of the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games. Rookie 1 reprises their role as the player character, as this time the plot takes place around the events of The Empire Strikes Back, when a group of rebel pilots discover the Empire is creating a new stealth fighter, the TIE Phantom. Rebel Assault 2 was notable for being the first Star Wars video game to use real actors, sets, and stunts shot against blue screens for its cutscenes. Boba Fett, 1995 to 2006. Boba Fett was a series of one-shot and miniseries comic books published between 1995 and 2006, telling the stories of the various hunts of Boba Fett. The series featured 7 one-shots: Bounty on Barkuda, When the Fat Lady Swings, Murder Most Foul, Twin Engines of Destruction, Agent of Doom, Overkill, and Salvage, which was a promotional half-issue. Boba Fett also featured 1 miniseries titled Enemy of the Empire. Splinter of the Mind's Eye, 1995 to 1996. Splinter of the Mind's Eye was a comic book miniseries adaptation written by Terry Austin and penciled by Chris Sprouse. The series adapts Alan Dean Foster's 1978 novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which was the first ever original novel in the Star Wars EU. Mos Eisley Cantina Pop-Up Book, 1995. Mos Eisley Cantina Pop-Up Book was a young reader book that featured details and backstories for many of the characters in Chalmun's Spaceport Cantina, originating from the Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina anthology book. The Mixed-Up Droid, 1995. The Mixed-Up Droid was a 20-minute long audiobook starring C-3PO, R2-D2, and Princess Leia that also included a short comic by Dark Horse that allowed listeners to follow along with the audiobook. X-Wing series, 1996 to 2012. The X-Wing series consisted of 10 novels written by Michael A. Stackpole and Aaron Alston. The series has been described as Star Wars meets Top Gun, following Wedge Antilles as rogue leader and his ragtag group of hotshot pilots, including many extremely popular EU characters such as Corran Horn and Tycho Selchu, as they take on ruthless Imperials such as Isan Izard and Kirtan Lore. The first 4 books, Rogue Squadron, Wedge's Gamble, The Krytos Trap, and The Back to War, were written by Michael Stackpole and begin in 6 ABY, telling the story of the New Republic's attempt to reclaim Coruscant from the Empire amidst the machinations of Isan Izard. The 5th, 6th, and 7th books, Wraith Squadron, Iron Fist, and Solo Command, were written by Aaron Alston and relate to the New Republic campaign against the Imperial warlord Zinj. The final 3 books, Isar's Revenge, Starfighters of Adumar, and Mercy Kill, all serve as standalone stories, with the first being written by Stackpole and the final 2 written by Alston. The series garnered significant praise from critics and fans, and it is often considered to be one of the most beloved series in the EU. The Black Fleet Crisis Trilogy, 1996. The Black Fleet Crisis Trilogy was a series of novels set in 16 to 17 ABY, telling the story of the New Republic's political crisis and military threats from the Evitha, a death-obsessed and xenophobic alien race hell-bent on conquering the galaxy. The novels included in the trilogy are Before the Storm, Shield of Lies, and Tyrant's Test. Shadows of the Empire, 1996 to 1998. Shadows of the Empire was a multimedia project including a novel, comic series, video game, and merchandising. The story bridges the 1-year gap between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Author Steve Perry was chosen to write the Shadows of the Empire novel, which would serve as the main outline for the entire initiative. The novel's main plotline focused on two main stories. First, to introduce Prince Sizor, the falling overlord of the Black Sun crime syndicate, whose goal was to replace Darth Vader at the Emperor's side. To do this, Sizor plots to kill Luke Skywalker after he suspects Vader's possible relationship with the young Jedi. Meanwhile, Vader continues to search for Luke on his own to turn him to the dark side. The second main plot point centers around Leia, Lando, and Chewbacca's continued search for Boba Fett, who is in possession of a carbonite-frozen Han Solo. Shadows of the Empire Jr. novelization was written by Christopher Golden and features a slightly scaled-down version of the story adapted for children. The Shadows of the Empire comic book miniseries loosely ties into the events of the novel, instead choosing to focus on Boba Fett's role in the story and his encounters with Bossk, Zuckuss, and 4-LOM, while also telling the story of Vader's agent Jix, assigned to protect Luke from within Jabba's swoop gang. There were many other comics that featured the events of Shadows of the Empire, including Star Wars' first ever pop-up comic book titled Battle of the Bounty Hunters, which reprinted the battle between Boba Fett and IG-88. 1997's Star Wars Shadow Striker, written by Ryder Wyndham and penciled by Nicholas Scholes, was published in Star Wars Galaxy No. 10 and told a story set prior to Shadows of the Empire about Vader's agent Jix. 1998's The Jabba Tape by John Wagner and Killian Plunkett, published in Star Wars Galaxy Magazine No. 13 and Star Wars Galaxy Collector No. 1-3, which continued the adventures of some of Jabba's swoop gang members after Return of the Jedi. The final tie-in comic book, also released in 1998, was Shadows of the Empire Evolution, also written by Steve Perry, which followed Sizor's human replica droid, Guri. The final piece of story from the initiative was the Shadows of the Empire video game, originally released exclusively for Nintendo 64, before being ported to PC with fully 3D CGI cutscenes. The game focuses on the story of Dash Rendar, player character in the game, a rogue with the heart and a longtime friend of Han Solo who captains the Outrider. Shadows of the Empire was the most ambitious multimedia project attempted by the Star Wars franchise and remains the template for Star Wars multimedia efforts to date. A Decade of Dark Horse No. 2, A Crumb for Hire, 1996. Decade of Dark Horse No. 2 was the second issue of Dark Horse's comic anthology series celebrating Dark Horse Comics' 10th anniversary. The issue features the story A Crumb for Hire, which tells the first meeting between Jabba the Hutt and Salacious B. Crumb. The New Rebellion, 1996. The New Rebellion was a novel written by Catherine Rush, taking place shortly after the events of the Black Fleet Crisis. The novel tells the story of Luke Skywalker, who attempts to discover a hidden master of the dark side set on the destruction of Luke, Leia, and the Solo children. The Star Wars Special Editions, 1997. To celebrate the 20th anniversary of Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope, all three Star Wars films from the original trilogy were re-released in theaters under the label of Special Editions. The 1997 theatrical releases of the Star Wars Special Editions included many additional scenes, using what was at the time new, highly advanced computer-generated effects that teased the technology that would be used in Lucas's upcoming prequel trilogy. The biggest changes to A New Hope included additional full CGI establishing sequences in Mos Eisley, shooting first in the Cantina scene, the reintegration of the deleted Jabba the Hutt sequence with a fully CG Jabba the Hutt, and a deleted scene in which Luke briefly reunites with Biggs before the Battle of Yavin. The Empire Strikes Back received the fewest alterations in 1997. They included new close-up shots of the Wampa on Hoth, establishing shots in Cloud City, Luke screaming when he drops down the chute to escape Vader, and this line of Vader's dialogue.
Bring my shuttle.
Alert my Star Destroyer to prepare for my arrival.
Return of the Jedi has the most significant additions, including extra establishing shots before the Sarlacc, as well as the CGI beak and extra tentacles for the monster. The replacement of the song Lobty Neck with Jedi Rocks, featuring new CGI characters like Jah Yowza and a CGI version of Sai Snoodles. Additional shots of Boba Fett flirting with Jabba's dancers, additional shots of Ula in the Rancor pit, and the film's ending Yub Nub sequence replaced with John Williams' victory celebration, and lengthened with shots of celebrations occurring in multiple different planets from the trilogies such as Bespin and Tatooine, but also included Coruscant for the first time on film. Many more changes would be implemented every time the films were released, again on a new platform, most notably in 2004 when additions were made to connect the films more closely to the prequels for the DVD release. Star Wars: A New Hope, the Special Edition, 1997. Star Wars: A New Hope, the Special Edition was a 4-issue comic book miniseries from Dark Horse Comics that adapted the special edition version of Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope, written by Bruce Jones and penciled by Eduardo Barreto. Dark Forces book series, 1997 to 1998. The Dark Forces series was a trilogy of novellas written by William C. Dietz that was based on the Dark Forces video game. They chronicle Kyle Katarn's transition from decorated Imperial Academy graduate to the rebellious rogue featured in the beginning of the video game series, as well as events after the first video game. The 3 novellas featured in the series are Dark Forces Soldier of the Empire, Dark Forces Rebel Agent, and Dark Forces Jedi Knight. Galaxy of Fear, 1997 to 1998. Star Wars Galaxy of Fear was a 12-book series of junior novels with a horror theme written by John Whitman. The books took place within the 18 months immediately following A New Hope. They told the stories of Tosh and Zach Aranda, their uncle Mom and Hull, and his droid DV-9, who were survivors from Alderaan trying to hide their force sensitivity from the Empire. The series featured new horror-inspired villains and creatures in the spirit of Star Wars mixed with the popular Goosebumps series by R.L. Stine. The 12 novels that made up the series were Eaten Alive, City of the Dead, Planet Plague, The Nightmare Machine, Ghost of the Jedi, Army of Terror, The Brain Spiders, The Swarm, Spore, The Doomsday Ship, Clones, and The Hunger. Yoda Stories, 1997. Yoda Stories was a video game developed and published by LucasArts for PC and Game Boy Color. The plot revolves around Luke Skywalker returning to Dagobah to complete his training with Master Yoda between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. It featured simple bitmap graphics and regular 32x32 icons with few limited animations. X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter, 1997. X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter was the third game in the X-Wing flight simulation video game series developed by Totally Games and published by LucasArts, released for PC. X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter featured technically superior graphics and gameplay, while this time requiring the use of joysticks instead of a mouse for control, and focusing on multiplayer combat rather than single-player story like the previous two installments. In November of 1997, an expansion pack for the game was also released titled X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter Balance of Power, which included 15 new campaign missions with cutscenes to appease fans who were disappointed by the original release's lack of a story. The Han Solo Trilogy, 1997 to 1998. The Han Solo Trilogy was a series of novels which told the official backstory of Han Solo prior to the events of A New Hope. The novels that made up the trilogy were The Paradise Snare, The Hutt Gambit, and Rebel Dawn. Many of the most notable events in Han's life were included in these books, such as his origins as an abandoned street urchin on Corellia, his past as a pilot in the Imperial Academy, his meeting and friendship with Chewbacca, the origins of his relationship with Lando Calrissian, and the Sabacc game that won him the Millennium Falcon. Star Wars Kids Magazine comic strips, 1997 to 1998. Star Wars Kids Magazine was a children's publication by Scholastic that ran in 3 separate iterations from 1997 to 2000. Within its issues were short comic strip stories published from 1997 to 1998, the first of which was The Rebel Thief by Ryder Wyndham and Gary Erskine, published in issues 1 through 5 of Star Wars Kids. Then X-Wing Marks the Spot by Mike W. Barr, Ken Stacey, and Glenn Mullally in Star Wars Kids numbers 6 through 10. And finally Imperial Spy in issues 11 through 15, also by Mike W. Barr, Ken Stacey, and Glenn Mullally. Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, 1997. Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 is the second game in the Dark Forces video game series of first-person shooters developed and published by LucasArts for PC. The game was considered a marked improvement over the original in every way, featuring improved gameplay and new multiplayer capabilities over the internet or LAN. It was also the first video game to allow players to play as a Jedi using lightsaber and force combat in multiplayer. The story takes place a year after the events of Return of the Jedi, continuing the adventures of Kyle Katarn, who after receiving a lightsaber and the instructions to protect the Valley of the Jedi on Ruusan, must face the 7 Dark Jedi led by the Inquisitor Jarek. The game's story mode was the second Star Wars game to feature real actors, sets, and stunts shot in front of a blue screen during its cutscenes, this time more than doubling the amount of live-action scenes in the game. The game is also notable for the introduction of the first light-dark choice system that alters Kyle's path based on the decisions made by the player. This would later become the chief choice mechanic in the acclaimed Knights of the Old Republic series. The game also received an expansion pack 4 months after its release at the beginning of 1998, titled Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith. Mysteries of the Sith added many enhancements including colored lighting, new enemies and force powers, as well as the expansion of the COG scripting language, new multiplayer modes, and the most exciting addition, the ability to play a significant portion of the expansion's story as Mara Jade. The Hand of Thrawn Duology, 1997 to 1998. The Hand of Thrawn Duology was a series of novels by Timothy Zahn taking place 10 years after the events of his seminal Thrawn Trilogy, and continuing the stories of the original trilogy characters from those novels, as well as Zahn's fan-favorite new characters Mara Jade and Talon Karrde. The series is made up of 2 novels, Spectre of the Past and Vision of the Future. The plot revolves around the looming outbreak of civil war in the New Republic, as the reveal of the Ka-Moss documents containing evidence of Bothan involvement in the near extermination of the Ka-Mossi people by the Empire prior to the destruction of Alderaan surfaces in the Senate. Simultaneously, Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade investigate a mystery at the edge of the galaxy, rekindling their relationship in the process. In the midst of all of this, however, now Admiral Gilad Pellaeon attempts to broker a peace treaty between the dwindling Imperial remnant and the New Republic, but the sudden apparent resurrection of Grand Admiral Thrawn throws his plans and the galaxy into flux. The Hand of Thrawn duology is notable for being a sort of concluding chapter to the Bantam Book era of Star Wars novels, as Zahn uses much of the novel's page time cleaning up and smoothing out many of the strange events of previous novels by other authors written in the continuity between his two series. Crimson Empire series, 1997 to 2012. The Crimson Empire series was a collection of 3 6-issue comic book miniseries and a one-shot published by Dark Horse Comics and written by Mike Richardson and Randy Stradley, with pencils by Paul Gulassi. The series follows loyal Imperial Royal Guard Kir Kanos, who is left with a blood oath against the enemies of the Empire after Palpatine's demise. The 3 arcs included in the series are Crimson Empire 2, Council of Blood, and Crimson Empire 3, Empire Lost, as well as the one-shot Hard Currency, which initially released as a 4-part comic in Dark Horse Extra number 21 through number 24. I, Jedi, 1998. I, Jedi was a novel written by Michael A. Stackpole set in 11 ABY around the events of Kevin J. Anderson's Jedi Academy trilogy, revisiting much of that story in the process. The novel features several of Stackpole's characters from his X-Wing novels, with the story following Corran Horn and his quest to become a Jedi in order to save his wife Mirax. The novel is notable for altering many of the events of the Jedi Academy trilogy by adding Corran Horn into many of its plot points despite his lack of involvement when the trilogy was originally released. The Bounty Hunter Wars, 1998 to 1999. The Bounty Hunter Wars was a book trilogy by K.W. Jeter detailing the events of Boba Fett, Dengar, Neela, and Kuat of Kuat, and other famous Star Wars underworld characters from the films and EU just after the Battle of Jabba's Palace from Return of the Jedi. The trilogy is notable for detailing Boba Fett's escape from the Sarlacc pit. The novels contained in the trilogy are The Mandalorian Armor, Slave Ship, and Hard Merchandise. Star Wars Journal Series, 1998 to 1999. The Star Wars Journal Series was a collection of junior novels retelling some notable events from the first-person perspectives of the characters themselves. The series is made up of 2 different sets of 3 books. First, in 1998, The Fight for Justice by John Peel, Captive to Evil by Jude Watson, and Hero for Hire by Donna Tauscher give the perspectives of Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, and Han Solo. A year later, the Star Wars Episode 1 Journal Series would continue the series with stories from Anakin Skywalker, Darth Maul, and Queen Amidala by Todd Strasser and Jude Watson. Mara Jade by the Emperor's Hand, 1998 to 1999. Mara Jade by the Emperor's Hand was a 7-issue comic book miniseries published by Dark Horse Comics and written by Timothy Zahn and Michael Stackpole, with pencils by Carlos Esquera. The series tells the story of Mara Jade around and after the events of Return of the Jedi as she attempts to complete her final mission, and is notable for further fleshing out Mara's time as the Emperor's Hand. Jedi Academy Leviathan, 1998 to 1999. Jedi Academy Leviathan was a 4-issue comic book miniseries published by Dark Horse Comics, written by Kevin J. Anderson and penciled by Dario Carrasco Jr. and Mark Heike. The series follows 3 Jedi from Luke's Academy, Kip Duran, Durana T, and Tioni, who travel to the world of Korbos after a mining excavation awakens a powerful ancient evil. Rogue Squadron, 1998. Rogue Squadron is an arcade-style flight simulation video game developed by Factor 5 and published by LucasArts for PC and Nintendo 64. The game's story mode took place between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, and tells of the formation of Rogue Squadron by Luke Skywalker and Wedge Antilles. Rogue Squadron featured fast-paced, action-based flight simulation combat that saw players embarking on missions with multiple objectives in large open-terrain maps. The game was praised upon its release and is still considered one of the greatest Nintendo 64 games of all time. Star Wars Republic, 1998 to 2006. Star Wars Republic was an ongoing comic book series published by Dark Horse Comics, running for 83 issues from 1998 to 2006. Originally just titled Star Wars until issue number 46, the line told stories spanning before The Phantom Menace, through Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars, and after Revenge of the Sith. The series' first arc, Prelude to Rebellion, was the only arc released prior to the opening of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, in theaters. It contained a story about the then Jedi Knight Ki-Adi-Mundi, which was billed as a prelude to The Phantom Menace, with heavy involvement from the Trade Federation in the story. The series would continue with 19 total arcs featuring Outlander and Emissaries to Malastare about Jedi-turned-Tusken Sharad Het, Twilight, Infinity's End, Darkness, the Stark Hyperspace War, the Deferonian version, and Rite of Passage revolving around the Jedi Quinlan Vos, The Hunt for Aurra Sing, which popularized the titular character, Honor and Duty, which followed Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi prior to Attack of the Clones, The New Face of War, which began the Clone Wars arcs, continued in the Battle of Jabim, Show of Force, Dreadnoughts of Rendili, Trackdown, and Siege of Seleucami, and finally Into the Unknown and Hidden Enemy, which took place after Revenge of the Sith. The series was widely praised for fleshing out many of the ancillary characters from the prequels and the Clone Wars cartoon, as well as adding much needed depth to many of the lead characters from the prequels. Thank you all so much for watching History of Star Wars Part 2. Comment below and let me know what your favorite part of this video was. What's your favorite piece of Star Wars material from this video? Also, if you haven't yet, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for continued Star Wars content. As I've said in the past, there will be 4 more episodes of the series covering all the way to the present day. Next episode will be 1999 to 2005, the prequel era. So stay tuned for that. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.